Under the direction of Bruce and Cammie Carter for the past 15 years, the Jackson Academy Marching Band has created a tradition of innovative and entertaining programs. Bruce and Cammie both attended high school and college in Mississippi. They are the parents of two children, Tracy and Corey, both of whom are seen in the course of this video as members of the Jackson Academy Band. In just the past 11 years, the JA Band has been 7 times a Class A champion and finalist at Bands of America regional competitions. They have attended BOA regionals in San Antonio, St. Louis, Atlanta, Johnson City, Indianapolis, and the University of Southern Mississippi. They have been a semifinalist at Grand Nationals 3 times and have been a national finalist and class champion. In all of these events, the JA Band has numbered no more than 44 students, drawing from a student body of less than 300 students grades 10 through 12. This video attempts to lay out some of the techniques and thought processes that Bruce and his staff go through every year to create these programs and to present the JA Band in competitive situations against much larger bands. Bruce is joined by Glenn McGehee. As the father of 3 children who have graduated from the Jackson Academy Band over the past 15 years, Glenn has a unique perspective on the growth and success of the program over the years. He himself is an ex-band director and is now a travel agent in Jackson. Bruce and Cammie would like to thank the following people who have contributed to the creation of the programs shown on this video.
Bruce, what were you thinking in 1989 when you came to a small Mississippi private school? Were you thinking about Bands of America, or what was going through your mind?
We find ourselves at this school as, I think initially we had 15. Now, by the time we started the season and got the kids on the field, I think we had a fair group, a number of students, maybe 35 students on the field that first year. The color guard was 2. I remember that was one of the big drawbacks. We had 2 students on either side of the band that would spin. Initial thought was not thinking about Bands for America or even competitions. We were just trying to figure out how are we going to put this group on the field and not be embarrassing at a home football game. I mean, it was really small. The instrumentation was really weird. It was just, how are we going to do this? So a lot of the things, it's funny because a lot of the things that we followed all these years at Jackson Academy were done initially, just the first year. Cammie and I sitting down, my wife, and I sitting down and said, how are we going to make this work? How can we present it? So a lot of the things, defining the stage area, I think that came out the first year. Obviously, we've got this big field out there, and we're not going to cover that big field. I think it'd be wrong to even try. Let's try to somehow define the stage area, and we've done that different ways over the years, but define the staging area, okay? Utilizing the kids to the best, you know, to the most effective. One of the first things was the trap sets. You know, we're a little short on drummers, but hey, I've got 2 guys here that play trap set really well. We can pull them out on a trailer, and we've got basically a full drum section. Well, if we're doing trap sets, then we're kind of thinking jazz or jazz rock. So that kind of led to a musical choice, you know. The color guard thing, we just kind of went up and down the halls and found some girls to be in the color guard. And I say we, but my wife and Keith Hall, who was helping us at that point, who now owns the band hall in Nashville, Tennessee. Keith lived in Jackson at the time and wrote our very first program. And the other thing was the girls had no training, so a lot of what the girls did that first year was just big hoops and things like that. We tried to make sure they looked good movement-wise and so forth, but we just didn't have the time to teach them to spin, so we didn't do any of that. Back to that first year, one of the things that we found out originally was that the kids could not march and play at the same time. They just never had done that. They would walk out in the field, stand, and then play. So in order to accommodate that, we wrote the show so that they never had to march and play at the same time. And we'd intersperse the ensemble parts with solo parts. So like during the ensemble parts, they would actually stand still and play. And the guard would move. We'd have them scurrying around. And then when it came time for the solos to happen, which these solos were interspersed all through the show, then the horns would move. So you had this constant motion all the time. It looked like I don't think anybody really ever caught on to the fact that they're really not moving and playing at the same time as a full band. But we just kind of interspersed this. It was really clever and very effective. By the end of the season, they were able to march and play, and we added the free element, I think the Chicago tune, free, onto the end of it, and formed a big JA on the field, and well, a little JA on the field. And the crowd went nuts, and it was a really successful season for us. And we did a local competition and made a Superior, which was the first time the group had ever made a Superior at a marching competition. And we've always viewed that first year as being just immensely successful, because we started from nothing, and we just really created a lot of ideas and concepts that we followed all these years. And a lot of those were just kids that we just kind of, as we say, found.
Since the beginning, you've had to use 7th graders to add to the numbers in the band. How do you incorporate them into the band and make them work with a high school band?
The band has been 7 through 12 since we started, and it's a scheduling thing at Jackson Academy. The only way the band will work is if all the band students 7 through 12 are in one period. And we've thought about fighting that over the years, but it's the way it is, and we've kind of made that work.
I've noticed how you've always customized the band program because you've had to use 7th graders. How did you get the drill writers to accommodate such young abilities and young strides and young musicianship?
Yeah, a lot of this is probably the most commonly asked questions from guys that have to use 8th graders, or some that have to use 7th graders like us. And my answer to that is very carefully. And because you don't want to run them off. The worst thing you can do to a child like that comes into the program is intimidate them. Throw them a piece of music that's all notes and say, okay, learn this, and then you're going to march some drill too. I mean, it'll frighten them, and they won't come back. They'll leave then, or they'll finish the year and won't come back, and we don't want either of those to happen. So we just try to be very carefully. We design the program for each individual student. Now, it takes a little bit, and I say that literally, and it sounds ridiculous, but again, we're only talking 35, 45 students at most. So yeah, we inventory every talent in the band. We inventory what level every student's at. And when we design the program, we design it for each individual student. We never ask a 7th grader to do something that we don't think he can accomplish by halfway through the marching season. The same with drill. We're very conscious with the drill writer. We say, okay, this is a 7th grader, keep his step size small, let's keep his exposure limited. We just don't want, that kind of pressure on that student at that point.
So when you do the drills, the drill writer knows.
Oh, absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And even at the camp, and that's one of the reasons we fell into this thing about having which we've always done for 15 years at Jackson Academy. We always have the drill writer at a week of camp, so that he can personally tailor it and make it work for each student that's out there. By the same token, you've got these kids who are seniors and who've been through so much and are really fine performers and fine marchers. Well, we want them to we want them to shine.
Tell everybody a little bit about your first band camp at Jackson Academy.
Yeah, we were weeks before the beginning of school. So the band camp, we had a band camp, but it was, I think, a week before school started. So we literally were pulling this first program together in '89 as school was starting. I mean, we were learning drill during school. Now, subsequently, we've added a band camp, which we do 2 weeks, and we've pretty much been consistent with that over the years. And we get a little earlier with it, but we try to create the whole show and that's one thing you and I have talked about a lot, and when did that happen? And it just happened, I think, probably '94, and was the first time that we actually created an entire show during band camp. I mean, the drill was done, the music was finished, the color guard stuff was sketched in pretty much, and we walked away from band camp with a full program. And we've been consistent with that since '94. Now, why do we do that? And one of the reasons is that we're here in Jackson. We basically, for many, many years, the only staff was myself and my wife. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't a lot of people involved with the program, but we were flying them in. So these are people that would come in for a week at a time or a couple of days at a time and weren't doing the day-to-day stuff. It's always been our philosophy that my wife and I can clean it. We can make it look clean. I mean, we can work it and get the performance level up. What we need are the creative aspects, and these are the people that we bring in. But they're only, they're here for a limited basis. So, yeah, we've got to get the most of them. So what we do traditionally for band camps, the first week of camp, we learn all drill. We bring the visual guy in, and he teaches drill, and that's all we do. We stage the guard, they don't spin at all, and the horns rarely play during the first week of camp. We just stage the drill. So at the end of 5 days, when the drill writer leaves, we have a complete visual program. The second week, we start learning music, and we bring in a color guard person who starts writing the book after the drill is finished, writing the work to fit the drill. And by the end of the week, hopefully we're putting it all together. And generally we're successful with that. We always, as you're aware, we always have a little show for the parents at the end of the second week for camp where we do pretty much the whole show. Now that's not to say that the show doesn't change constantly, because if it doesn't work, or we thoroughly believe this at Jackson Academy, if it doesn't work, get it out of there. You know, we want every second to be effective, and if something's not effective or not working or just doesn't keep your interest, then it's got to go, and we'll rewrite it.
Musicianship and tuning has always been high on your priorities, and I've always marveled at the musicianship of the band members. How did you get them to take private lessons, and was that something that you started out with immediately?
Oh, lessons are a huge part of what we did, and we hit upon that very early at Jackson Academy, was that there's such a resource of teachers here in the community, people. Initially it was all symphony people. We have the Jackson Symphony here in town, and it's a moderately sized symphony that plays fairly well, and a lot of these guys don't make a lot of money, you know, and they're glad to come to the band hall and teach a couple of lessons during the week, and we had a lot of success initially bringing in symphony people to teach, and that's why I think the program moved so quickly initially. Within 2 or 3 years, I felt like the level of the program grew exponentially. I mean, it was really a very good band at the end of the third year, and that's a lot of it, just the day-to-day process of having the lessons and having those teachers around the band hall.
When did you first begin creating the band program or show during band camp?
During the first couple of years, there was a guy that lived here in town who did our drill for us. First I mentioned Keith Hall, who actually lived here in town. And so during the season, it was easy with him there at every other rehearsal, or just to call Keith on the phone, okay, we're ready to go to the next tune now, that sort of thing. Keith would come in and teach that or help us stage the next part of the show. So it worked better. We had him locally. The next year, we fell in with Tommy Keenum. Tommy and Nola Jones, who Nola's now national and does a lot of judging and that sort of thing. Nola and Tommy had a company here in town called FX, and they wrote drills and did color guard books for a lot of local bands, and we utilized them. And Dave Watt, who was a friend of Tommy's, and did all their drill for them. And for about 3 years, well, these are local people. Tommy lived, what, a couple of blocks from Jackson Academy at that time. So it was very easy to take, you know, a month to put the whole show together, you know, because Tommy was there, Tommy was available.
What was the smallest amount of show that you actually got on the field at the very beginning of the season?
It was 92, and it was the first Matheny show that we did. And the only thing that we came out of camp with was the opener. Well, the opener was really, really short. It was like a minute and a half. And I remember going to a football game and doing that minute and a half and walking off the field, and everybody going, was that it? You know, it was just, was that the whole show? But yeah, that was part of the reason to try to get more done during camp, too. And I think that was not as much, it was just a coordination thing with the people that were involved with the creative aspect, getting all that done. We were a little slow getting drill done and that sort of thing. But we got much better with all that, and obviously I think we're very good at it right now.
What was the first year that you came out of band camp with the complete show together, ready to go?
94 was the first year. The first year we brought Jeff Namian in from New York. Jeff was just, and Stanley Knob. And I think Jeff was actually, we had gone 3 days of camp and we had 3/4 of the show done, and Jeff was just kind of winding down. It was really tough. I mean, this is, you're talking about just really throwing stuff out there, looking at it. It was pretty much like staging a Winter Guard show. And it was staging all this. We're going all day long for 3 days. It's the first time any of us had ever tried to do this sort of thing at this sort of pace. And Jeff's kind of winding down, and in flies in Stanley. And Stanley's got ideas for a closer. And that, it picked up the energy. All of a sudden we had ideas to finish the program. But at the end of 5 days, we had a complete visual.
So it was program. 2 weeks you put together the whole show.
Absolutely.
And was ready to go. What was different about those 2 weeks versus the 2 weeks where when you came out you only had the opener?
You know, I think initially we wasted a lot of time. That would be my biggest thing. We just wasted a lot of time. It wasn't effective. And a lot of it, again, just came down to just not having program ready for the kids to learn. I can't tell you how many bands I know go into camp and all they have is the opener. I mean, that's all they have to teach the kids is drill for the opener. Now, when we go to camp now, we know we've got the entire show mapped out, charted out. It's ready to be taught. So it becomes upon it, the responsibility falls on the staff then to teach it during that period of time. We've already created it. We don't like to see staff show up and create things on the spot. Now, occasionally that has to happen to fill, but we insist that the staff have as much of it prepared as they can when they show.
Even though Bands of America doesn't have novice category anymore, do you remember the first year that you took the band to Bands of America? I believe we won novice that year.
as I recall, the very first show that we did was the show that involved all the mannequins. And again, now this, all right, here we go. This was the 1990, so this would have been our second year at Jackson Academy. Well, again, we're looking for some way to define the staging area. I had seen a band on the field the year before do a Beatles show, and the guard, it was a huge guard of maybe 24 or 30 girls, and they had interacted with these huge cutouts of Beatle characters all during the show. And I thought, that is so clever. It made the guard look huge, and at some point you couldn't tell the guard from the Beatles mannequins. You know, it was really on the field, especially from a distance. So I found the group. They had been sold to another band in Louisiana, and I chased these mannequins down, talked to the director. He actually brought them to my band hall for me. We paid a little bit of nothing for them. So I had these 30 mannequins. They were just cutouts, and we made them band people. We painted the band uniform on. We actually put cords with little pieces of rope, all the cord stuff that was, so it was very detailed. You know, the buttons, I think, were actually bottle tops that were painted silver, and those were the buttons. We had enough extra hats because whoever had originally bought the JA uniforms had bought enough for 100 kids. So we had enough extra hats that we actually put hats on them, band hats. So they had a three-dimensional kind of look to them. Well, we put these things in a big arc originally in the show across the back of the field. And it was just, that was totally defining. It looked like you had a whole row of 30 band students in the back. And at the time, we're probably marching 35, 40 kids in the band. During the show, they would bring the mannequins up. The guard interacted with them, danced with them. It was, the band would actually pose next to the mannequins, so that you could not tell. At some points, I would be on the sideline, and I would expect to see a mannequin step off, because you could not, from a distance, you really couldn't tell. So it was a really smart thing. It defined the stage area, and it was so clever, and it made the group look, it doubled the size of the band almost instantly. No, that was the whole idea. It was just to kind of define, you know, kind of put a stage across the back, a curtain, if you will, across the back, and it very effectively did that for us. And we started to notice that you didn't think about the rest of the field, and we was, oh, this is kind of what we've been looking for. And at that time, it also occurred to us to keep bringing the boundaries in a little bit. Even then, we were using a little bit more field than I think was effective for the size of the group.
Did the judges react to that negatively in any way, or were they pleased with the way you defined the stage?
Generally, every once in a while you'll have someone say, I wish you could use more field, but we know better. I think, I'm not going to say that we know better than judges, but I think our feeling, and we've been consistent, the people that work with the band over the years, that it's better to define an area that we're going to fill up and that you're satisfied with, you know, as opposed to taking this few students and trying to stretch them. And I've seen it done. I've seen really small bands. I've seen bands smaller than ours try to utilize the whole field, and it's just not effective. I mean, you're going back and forth constantly. You just kind of, and when they try to spread them, you lose any kind of sound, you know, from the group. So we just don't think it works. So the next year I think it was 92, 91, we brought in the chairs, and we did a whole show around chairs, and every member of the horn line and the guard had a chair. And they were white folding chairs, and we positioned them initially across the back, again as a curtain, and then they became part of the show. Actually, the horns would bring them up and leave them in different positions and that sort of thing. It was very clever, very simple to do. All of a sudden we had a toy to play with too. All through the season, we were constantly looking at these chairs going, you know, we could do this with the chair. So the kids could stand on the chair, sit on the chair. We had places where the horns would sit, the guard would stand in the back on the chair. So you had all different levels going on, you know, up and down all the time. We had they could spin the chairs on one leg and that sort of thing. So all sorts of clever things that we did with the chairs. That was the show initially that was intended to go to nationals, and that was going to be our first big BOA push. And everybody got sick. We just had a real bad bout of the flu around the school, and it got into the band, and I think we had to cancel like the day of. Much to Cam Stay's Bands of America's dismay, we had to call that day and said, you know, we're not going to be there. And we were actually in the program that year. I think this was 91. We were in the program for nationals and just didn't make it.
In the early years, what kind of things did you do with the guard to help their performance, since they were basically untrained at that point?
Well, obviously they didn't have a lot of skills, so the girls, and I don't say they were untrained. We always work to make the girls look as good as possible, but you know, it just takes a while. It's like learning to play an instrument or anything. It just takes a while to teach a girl to spin a flag effectively, or a rifle, or a saber, as it even got more complex. So initially it was just big items, you know, like hoops. I think the first year we did hoops, big round hula hoops, even smaller hula hoops that we found, and we just put streamers on them, and the girls would do little simple arm motions with them, just entirely effective. I mean, big stuff like that, very simple, and then you could work on just making the girls look good as they moved around the field, the things that were important. And it gave us a good basis for the girls to build on for the next year, for the coming years, when we actually did start trying to legitimately spin equipment. Sometimes, you know, even in '93, the year we won nationals, some of that equipment, I'm not even sure I'll say this now, but I don't think that group was really well trained, the guard. Now, they looked good and they moved really well, but a lot of that was just unconventional equipment that nobody could spin properly. I mean, at one point, the girls were spinning seahorses. They were about this long and they were cut out of wood, and nobody can spin a seahorse and look great, you know. But it was effective. But it was, you know, it was just a gimmick to try to cover, which were just some skills that we had not quite caught up on yet.
So you've done chairs and mannequins. What did you do following that in 1992?
It was the first year we did the Matheny, which was, I was in the Instrumentalist magazine and flipping through, actually Mac Dees, who works with us here, Mac had called me one day and said, look at the Instrumentalist on page so-and-so, look at the bottom of the page, and there's an ad for Marching Matheny. Well, he and I were really big Pat Metheny fans, and here was somebody who had written 4 Pat Metheny charts for marching band. Well, we thought this was just as clever as could be, and it's a little ad at the bottom of the Instrumentalist, and a page in the Instrumentalist. So I called the number, and it's a guy named Bob Curnow, who's a jazz arranger of some renown, and at that point, and I called Bob up on the phone and I said, what's the deal? He said, yeah, I wrote these 4 charts. I really like Metheny, and I wrote these 4 charts for marching band, and you know, they're $50 a piece. I said, bargain. So we bought the 4 charts. Great charts. We used them that year, and we developed the whole program. Now, to divine around those 4 Metheny charts, and it was we edited them to fit the group again, but great material, and we really mined the Metheny over the years a lot. It really worked really well for us. I think we did 4 years of Metheny, maybe, yeah, and it was just almost too much. You know, I'm not sure that there was that much Metheny to bear that kind of scrutinization over 4 years of programs without repeating something, which we didn't do. That year we used, for the backdrops in '92, we used the screens. I don't know if you remember that. We had Venetian blinds that were on a frame, and they were maybe 4 feet wide and 6 feet long. And the girls would go behind and manipulate the Venetian blinds so that you saw different sides of the blinds. And every side of the blind had a different picture on it. So it'd start the show with one picture, the girls would disappear, turn the Venetian blind to the back, and then another picture would appear. And then for the closer, I think there was actually a scroll, a rolled up piece of canvas at the top that the girls could let loose, and it dropped down in front. So we had essentially 3 different. These were stationed around the back, and again, we're just defining the staging area, plus changing the picture that was around the back. This was very simple, it was very cheap, and it was very effective. And this was the first year we won a regional at the University of Southern Mississippi. I think we were 6th at that regional, placed in finals, and just a big surprise to us. I mean, it was a pivotal point for Jackson Academy. And again, it was the Matheny, which we had fallen into very cheaply, and the use of these the Venetian blinds in the back, which again was very simple. We just had to keep, I remember they melted. They would melt in the sun because they were so cheap. We were getting them at Walmart. And if you kept them out in the sun too long, they would actually start warping. You know, they would just get so hot and the plastic would bend, and we'd have to go get a new one and repaint it. But that was part of the process during the whole season.
Where did you get the idea for the mat? It seems to work extremely well for the band. Could you tell us a little bit about the mat?
The mat came about in 1993. And actually, it's a great story because it was an accident. We always did band camp beside, as you know, beside the band hall, which we still do. But back then, our rehearsal area is right outside the band hall. I mean, it's 2 steps outside the band hall, which is a blessing for us. But back then, all that was grass. Well, about 3 weeks before school started, which is coming up a week before band camp, they decide that they're going to make all this parking. So I literally pull up to the school one day, and there is a backhoe there just taking off the top level of our practice field. And I go to the headmaster and I say, you know, that's not going to work. That's what we were planning on doing band camp. And he said, gosh, I can't help you. I'm sorry we didn't tell you about this, and that sort of thing. So I immediately called Tommy Keenum, who was doing our show, Tommy and Dave Watt, and we have a big meeting over at his house. And how are we going to handle this? Where are we going with band camp? And I think it was Tommy who said, you know, if we're going to use this size, if we're going to limit the size of the show that we're doing, he said, let's just do it in a gym somewhere. You know, it'll be a lot cooler. We'll get a lot more done, which, you know, Mississippi summers can be brutal, especially that time of year. So I said, that's a great idea. Let's see if we can. So we scouted around town, found an air-conditioned gym, and we rented it for the period of 2 weeks. Well, we're going to do the whole show. Initially, we were going to take masking tape, put the yard lines down with masking tape, and then just use little Post-it dots and put those down for the drill points and learn the whole drill like that in the gym. Well, about a week into this process, we're having another meeting over at Tommy's house, and Dave Watt, who's actually the guy who put the dots on the page, the drill writer, Dave goes, you know, this is really becoming winter guard. He says, why don't we just put a mat down? use the mat. And of course, we're all going, oh, but you can never put the mat on the grass outside, and the kids marching on the mat on the grass. It wouldn't work. It would move around. And we talked about it for about an hour. At the end of the hour, we said, well, why not? Why couldn't we? We pretty much discussed all the things. So the negatives of it, and we threw all those out. It was just kind of a process of us getting used to it. So we left that. They came up with the idea that it was the two of them through our discussions came up with the idea of using the mat. It immediately defined the staging area. I mean, that's it. You forgot the entire field out there, except the area that was covered by the mat that we moved on and off of. And that was the ultimate stage for the band, and it worked just perfectly. The first year it was the beach water sort of scene. The water scene was actually 2 layers. And this mat we found. Somebody had used it for winter guard, and we found that mat, and we had it just shipped in. Tommy and Dave found the group that they had seen the group use this. We bought it from them. They shipped it to us. They were glad to get rid of it. Shipped it down to us, and I cannot tell you what a look of dismay was on my parents' face the first day. The truck rolls up and this pulls out, and I had about 4 or 5 parents to meet us at the band hall, and I said, okay guys, of course it weighs about 400 or 500 pounds, you know, it's a big rolled up little piece of mat. Take it out in the field and roll it out. And I remember specifically looking around all these band parents and them just scratching their heads going, now we're going to pull this out every Friday night? And I'm going, yeah, it'll be okay, it'll work out. But it was kind of tentative, but it worked out so well for us that year, and it's something that we've continued, I think with the exception of 95 and 96 and 97 that we didn't use a mat. We just tried to back away from that a little and try other things. But starting with 98 up to the present, we've been using a mat. We try to change the color of the mat and the shape and the design of it every year. It kind of defines what the program's about. Using a mat outside is a whole different animal. We all know what a mat inside in a nice winter guard area, maybe a dirty gym floor, but you can sweep it off. A lot of it will fall off by itself, But when you start taking a mat outside, you're dealing with all different issues. One, we never put it on asphalt. I say never, but occasionally we have to because of weather conditions. We try not to spread it on asphalt and have the kids do it on top of asphalt because it'll cut through the mat. Sometimes. Now, sometimes we just have to do it. But anytime we take that mat out on a Tuesday night, which is our big night rehearsal time, we bring the mat out. It takes an hour to clean it up afterwards. It's going to pick up grass. You pick up mildew at night, the whole mat gets soaking wet. So yeah, it's a very labor-intensive thing. My parents hate to see it coming. The band parents hate to see it coming. But I think they all realize what it brings to the program, how important it is. But yeah, the care and maintenance of the mat has become a big part of our program at Jackson Academy. It's interesting you say that the story about the mat is you can't bring the mat out during the day. And the story on this was one time we tried to bring the mat out about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we pulled it out in the field and did about an hour and a half rehearsal. And every once in a while I'd pull it back to make sure it wasn't hurting the grass, and it just seemed to be wet, and it seemed to be doing okay underneath. We roll up the mat. Next morning I pull up to the school, and there's half the student body standing out on the football field. I go out there, and it's the outline of the mat, which at that point was very irregular sort of shaped mat, was burnt into the grass. It had actually boiled the grass underneath. And yeah, we were that Friday night we went onto the field, pulled the mat out, which was in a different place than where we had it. So you had the actual mat, this is Friday night football game, actual mat on the field, and you had the area that had been burnt that Tuesday night, or that Tuesday afternoon. So you had 2 mats in the crowd yelling grass killers, and that sort of thing. It was a very, very bad moment. So we learned our lesson then. Don't take the mat out during the day. We wait till night when it won't damage the grass that's underneath it.
I actually remember one year where you were getting the mat off the field, and I think they were rolling somebody up in the mat.
Yeah, absolutely. She fell down, and the parents were not going to stop getting it off because we really, that's another aspect of this. You really have to train these parents a lot like we do with the kids. We have to rehearse the whole process of getting everything out there in 4 and getting it off in 2 for the Bands of America events. And yeah, in that hurry to get it off, it's like they won't stop for anything. And a parent tripped, fell onto the mat, but they kept pulling the mat. So literally they were pulling the mat and pulling the girl, this woman, and as they pull off, they're folding the mat over, so they were literally almost folding the person up inside the mat to get it past the end zone, so they would stop the timing of the show.
What do you do with the old mats and props after you use them?
Right now we've got 2 or 3 stockpiled outside the band hall. So, and we've gotten to the point where we just don't sell things like we used to. We just hold on to it thinking that, well, eventually it'll come back around. Because over the 15 years, I can't say how many times it's come up that we said, gosh, you remember that thing we used in '93? I can't tell. I think last year during indoor, this is a perfect example, we came up with the idea, well, this would be great if we could get the chairs. Well, we don't have the chairs anymore. We used to have 30 or 40 white folding chairs, but we let all the chairs go over the years. And it was the point we said, well, we wish we had the chairs that we had back in '92 to use in the indoor program. So we kind of just hold on to everything, and it makes it real crowded.
It takes a lot of parental involvement to get the band on the field. I'm always amazed at the excitement that the band parents exhibit toward the band. It's absolutely incredible.
You know, it's a big part of what makes the Jackson Academy thing so special is the parental involvement. Because when we travel, it's a family thing. You know, it's the parents are there, the kids are there, and they're all just they're so important to what happens on the field. These rehearsals with the parents, I mean, you've been to a couple of them those last couple of nights before we go to nationals or go to a regional, and to have those parents out there and, you know, we do an hour rehearsal with the parents, practicing getting everything on and everything off, and can get kind of tense because that's a lot of stuff to get out and hooked up in that short period of time. One of the points we made initially when we started this conversation was about what was I thinking when I came to Jay, and I really wasn't thinking about a program like this. It developed, and the reason it developed was because of the interest of the parents. Literally, we had parents the first couple of years I was at Jackson Academy. The motto of the band parent organization was whatever it takes. They wanted a successful program, and they just whatever it takes. If we have to build this to pull the drum sets on, let's do that. You know, they were really open, and I think initially it was that parent group of the first 2 or 3 years that let this thing develop, and kind of were the energy behind it. I was just there kind of, you know, providing ideas and monitoring and bringing in some people to help this happen. But yeah, a lot of the energy were those parents, and it is still like that. The parents are what drive this in the kids.
I've noticed over the years you've been very creative with the use of electronics for the keyboards and bass, and what were you thinking when you put those on the field, and how did it work?
The very first year we had an electronic piano and a bass, electric bass on the field. So that was '89, and the bass was even though we were using tuba on the field, it just gave you a bottom that the rest of the sound can rest on. And if you're a small band, I think that's the first thing is electric bass. I think it helps more than anything. Even keyboard bass. We've done a couple of years where we don't have that bass player. We just have a keyboard bass out there. And over the last couple of years, the biggest improvement on the bass sound was the subwoofer. Putting a big subwoofer on the field, and they're not that expensive, but it makes all the difference outside because that bass sound dissipates so quickly and doesn't make it up into the stands.
I remember one year at local contest, you'd gotten a 2, and how did the judges react that year to the electronics on the field?
We had a lot of trouble in our local circuit. The band that won the first regional in '92, I think a week before that happened, we actually made a 2 at a local show here in Jackson when everybody else made a 1. I mean, and so this was a band that was destined to do much bigger things that season, and it was just strictly a knee-jerk reaction from the judges over the use of electronics on the field. And again, this is 1992. Jackson, Mississippi, and they just thought it wasn't appropriate in some way, shape, or form we were cheating. And I submit that we weren't. One thing we've always done with the electronics, we occasionally will deliver a melodic line with the electronics, but it's a support. It's like think of it as a rhythm section with the jazz band. You've got the bass, you've got the keyboards, you've got the trap sets. It's the rhythm section, and the horns are delivering, and it frees up the horns to deliver the melody lines.
What kind of comments were you getting from the judges?
Well, I think initially we were the favorite comment was it's too loud. You know, it's covering the band. And what we were trying to do was just get a mix. We thought it was such a lot of the interesting sounds that we were discovering initially, which if you go back in '94, I think, or '95, those are some great sounds that we were full-blown electronic in '94. We've kind of backed away from that, but I think '94, '95, a lot of that, all those timpani sounds and all that were just little mallet cats. There were mallet cats and little mallet pads, electronic pads that the drummers were just playing on that were running through a module. And it was very simple and easy to hook up, and the sounds were incredible, easy to project in a large stadium because you can, immediately through the system, just pure sounds that amplify very well. So we just had more fun with that, and it was real exciting. But a lot of it was just the judges' reaction was it's too loud, and over the years, and now we actually hear people say, well, I could hear more of that, electric guitar sound, So as people have gotten more used to it, they're, more receptive.
I remember one year where you had all the horns with wireless mics. How did that work?
That was a big experiment. I think this was 2000 or 2001, that show. And it was the History of Jazz show. It was the Louis Armstrong kind of program. And for some reason, which can happen in small settings like this, you lose, a couple of kids here, somebody move out, somebody transfers, somebody graduates, and next thing you know, you're looking at a horn line. I think that year of maybe 12 total, and it was really small and a little scary. So one of the ideas was to put that horn line out there. Now the guard remained strong, and the percussion thing was still pretty strong. But for some of the horn line, the great players, good players, all the guys were just really strong players, but just not a lot of them. So one of the ideas we had was let's just put wireless mics. I think this came from Mac Dees, who's worked with the horn line over the last 15 years. Let's put wireless mics on all the instruments. Just a little battery pack, a little pack on the side, in their uniform, which we had to figure out a way to attach it to their uniform. And then we ran it up through the sleeve, and then it came out, and then actually had a mic that attached to the end of the bell. And we had a board on the sideline, and we trained one of the students to work the board and to balance the sound during the show, and to blend it in with the electronic sounds that we hear. When it worked, it was awesome. It really worked very well, especially Friday night football games. It was great. And we came upon the idea that we're really not amplifying the sound as much as we're just reinforcing it. We're really not trying to make the band sound 3 times as loud. We're just trying to, reinforce the sound of the band a little bit. So we minimalized the amplification part. It wasn't really loud, in other words, but it was enough to make it very effective. The problem we ran into was whenever that was the year we did 3 regionals, which was a tough one for us, and it's just for where we're located in Mississippi doing 3 regionals, it's a lot of travel. Well, for the first 2 regionals, we'd get halfway through the show for some reason, and it would all just go haywire. I mean, it was just so many mics out, so many wireless mics out there. They were going to pick up something, somebody walking around, or some security guard checking in with another security guard, or something like that, or just excess noise from somewhere, outer space or whatever. But we had so much trouble with those wireless mics. And for those two performances, first two regionals, just halfway through the show, we finally ended in Atlanta, which was our third regional that year. And it happened a little bit during the show, but we had told the guy on the student that was working the board, look, if this happens, just turn it all off. So about 3/4 of the way through the show, we start picking up some interference. Well, look, as trained, as instructed, the student just kills everything on the board, so we were at that point acoustic. Well, we finished the show like that, and the kids played well, and it was a really cute show. I've always enjoyed that show. And we had the chance, we made finals, had the chance to go back that night. So I looked at the horn line before we went back out, and I said, guys, you know, we've had, and they, at that point, the kids were all snake bit with these wireless mics too. Just incredibly complex. It just, you know, it's hard for them to start a show not knowing whether the stuff's going to work or what's going to happen halfway through the show. Is it all going to start feeding back or picking up, you know, noises from outer space or whatever. So I said, guys, you know, I don't think this is, it's not working for us. It hadn't worked. It's our last show of the season. You know, let's go without the wirelesses. So the guys went, yeah. And I could read from the kids right there that this was really frustrating them. The whole season had been just really frustrating for them. So we went back out that night, and we won Class A, and I think we took high music with basically 11 horns playing. High music in Class A with 11 horns playing on the field. And we did it, and in finals it was strictly acoustic, which we probably should have done all season, but it was a noble experience. And it goes back to our philosophy at this point, which is don't use wireless mics. If there's any way you can put that thing out there and run a wire to it, that's the way to do it.
I've always been amazed at the high marks you get from music while you play in the domes. It seems to really favor the small bands.
Well, we've often said that the BOA arenas are favorable to Jackson Academy because the band is a little smaller and it doesn't ring so. You know, it's a clearer sound. It's almost more effective at some points, you know, especially the percussion thing. With just our 2 trap sets out there, I mean, it's perfect for a dome. That's just enough percussion for a dome. But you get some of these big bands out there with these huge drum lines that are totally out of balance, and it'll ring for a minute after the band leaves the field. You're still hearing the percussion ring around the top of the dome, and we don't have that problem.
I've noticed that you use the color guard in so many different ways, and one of the ways is performing on their musical instruments. Does that seem to help with the scoring?
Yeah. You know, the guard thing, I'm glad you brought that up because it's the versatility factor that we try to exhibit every year. And obviously, all of our guard girls play instruments. They're all musicians first, and then they play the guard. They pick up flag or rifle or saber as a secondary thing. And that's not to say they're not good at it because some of the girls get exceptionally well. Through BOA, one of the things to be successful at BOA, you've got to have the woodwind scores. And obviously we march all brass. The guys are all playing brass instruments all the way through. Even if they're sax players or so forth, they're going to pick up a brass instrument, which again is the versatility. A lot of the kids play more than one horn. So we try to feature the girls through the show on their woodwind instruments. So they're coming in and out of the guard, performing on either solo or small groups on woodwind instruments. And we've done a lot with that since probably '95, I think. Absolutely, and in almost all cases, that's entirely where our woodwind score comes from. Is the girls coming out of the guard to perform.
We got tickled one year when you had one drum player marching solo. What was that all about?
Occasionally you get somebody saying that this is not a legitimate percussion thing because we're not doing what the other guys are doing. We're not marching. So it's easier for those guys just to sit back there in a pit. Now this was back, we're talking 92, 93. Nowadays you see a lot of guys, a lot of bands will go out there and they just ground their whole percussion section. I mean, they never move. Even though they got enough players probably to put a little section out there, to put a section out there. It's just it's an artistic decision. So now it's okay. Back then we'd occasionally find a judge that would say, well, this is not valid because they're not moving around. I think the specific you're talking about, we brought one guy off the trap sets at one point, put him in the drill on snare, and it was kind of a nod, as you say, to the judges that are making these comments about this is not legitimate. Well, here's your marching percussionist. There he is. He went through I think half of the closer on one snare. It was funny.
Bruce, your bands have always competed very well against its larger competitors. What kind of things do you do for the band to get it to compete so well?
Well, we just try to play the sheets. We're very conscious. The first thing we did when we started in BOA was we got a hold of the sheets, we laid them out on a big table, and just went over every item and said, okay, we're going to have to achieve in each one of these categories. And we always are careful in the design of the program to demonstrate these abilities. Now, it may be the same kids that are demonstrating these abilities through the show, hence the versatility, swapping back and forth, but we try to put all of those things into the program up front when we actually design the program. So the one thing that's kept us at BOA and maybe drew us to BOA initially, and one thing we really respect about the activity is that, yeah, it doesn't matter how big the band is. It's about how well they perform and what type of program you're putting out there. So.
What kind of warm-ups or exercise? How do you keep them in tune so well?
Yeah, we warm up a lot.
Once you get them on the field, how do they stay in tune?
Yeah. Well, a lot of that's just musicianship. These are kids that are, they take a lot of lessons and they play at a pretty high level. Our warm-up, everybody, the visual staff always gives me grief about the length of the warm-up because if you've seen it, it's really, really long. And we just have a lot of fun with that. A lot of lip slurs, a lot of ensemble exercises and that sort of thing. And I think that's what makes the kids as strong as they are as performers, that we're able to get so much sound out of a few players because we're constantly pushing the limits on how much can we get out of these kids, sound-wise, and then pitch is something we're all over the band with the tuner all the time, and we will tune in any environment, especially using electronics. You've got it because we don't change it just gets confusing. We tried to do that, change the key on the electronics to go to wherever the horns are going because of temperature, but basically we keep the electronics at A440 and we just try to tune to that if we can, regardless of where we're at. Now, one of the good things about Bands of America is that, and the arenas that we participate in, the domes and so forth, the environment's controlled. So, if you're at 70, 72 degrees, you can kind of keep the pitch pretty constant. I think we're doing the same thing everybody else does. I think we're just doing a lot more of it. We just really stress that and believe that it's more important almost in the performance aspect, is building. Building the strength and the air. A lot of breathing exercises. We really believe in that. We've done those for 15 years now. Just getting the kids as much air inside their body and as much air through the horn that they can put.
So how do you get the 7th and 8th graders to sound like mature musicians?
A lot of this, if they can, we always say at the end of the season, if they can stand out there on that asphalt, which is where we rehearse every day, if they can stand on that asphalt and go through this lengthy warm-up, then it's not really important how many notes they can play or how fast they can play, but if they can get a sound that resonates that instrument, then we're thrilled. We're thrilled. So, and I think it's through the warm-up. Again, that's how we're developing how these young kids can stand out there and play with these full sounds. We don't have a 7th grade class or an 8th grade class. So these are kids that we're absorbing into the program in the 7th grade, but at the same time, we've got to design sort of a course of study, so that they can kind of grow with the program as they're in the program. So that's how we're able to accomplish that.
And I think it's very clever how you keep it from the 7th and 8th graders that they're competing against bands that have all 10th, 11th, and 12th.
We don't talk about that a lot. You're right. Yeah, we don't talk about that a lot. But you're right. Most of the bands you'll see, especially at some of the regionals and nationals, a lot of the bands are 10 through 12. And here we are, 7 through 12. So we just try to keep the kids, especially this is a good point, when we arrive at the arenas, we just try to keep the kids focused on what they're doing. Just try to ignore everything else. We don't show up till it's time to get off the bus. We don't show up and walk around and let them get scared or see the size. I remember the big story was '93, was we were warming up across the curtain from Duncanville, Texas, and we kept hearing this incredible clarinet sound. And we were physical warm-ups on the other side of the curtain. So me and a couple of the trumpet players, we go up and we part the curtain and look through, and it has to be 30 clarinets in an arc facing us, going through their warm-up exercises, scales and so forth. Well, that's more kids than we've got in the whole horn line right there in their clarinet section playing for us. And that was intimidating. I mean, we didn't even want to see the brass. We didn't want to see the Duncanville brass at that point, No. So we try to keep them from that same. And we do that through just keep them focused and keep the schedule moving so that we're passing through the process and we do our thing on the field. And it's not till after it's over that we'll go back in and let them, look at other bands and see what's going on.
Do you mind talking a little bit about the budget for the small band?
Oh, a couple of points here. First, it's never cheap. This is not cheap. And one of the assets we've had at Jackson Academy are the resources that we've got. But they're not incredible. I mean, I run into guys all the time who are telling me the figures that they've got for the marching band and putting their staff together and that sort of thing. And nowhere near do we touch that. We're a fraction of what some bands are spending. I think part of it is because the staff for so many years was just Cammie and myself. I mean, it was just two people basically doing all this, and then we would hire these people to come in for a week or two here or there that would give us the creative input and that sort of thing. But basically, so you just got two people on a daily basis doing that, you know. I don't think, and by the same token now I'll say that, I don't think just because you're a smaller group that you can expect your budget to be a lot different. I mean, the creative aspect is still going to cost you the same. I mean, it costs me the same as it costs, say, Duncanville again. For their show, I bet my drill writer costs just as much as their drill writer costs. You know, I mean, the guys are they got a standard fee, and that's how much you're going to pay. They're not going to give you a cut just because you're only dealing with 35 students as opposed to dealing with 350 students, you know. So you have to be prepared to pay for the same. And in some cases, you have to pay a little more because it's in the design. Where we're successful is we're successful through the design, through the careful utilization of each student in the band. And yeah, that takes a lot of time. You were talking earlier about the one thing that amazes you or that you noticed over the years is how seamlessly everybody enters and exits the performance area. And that takes a lot of time. With so many things going on during a show and so many kids demonstrating so many talents, it just takes, you have to look at it and look at it and look at it. Half our time, literally, is entrances and exits out of the performance area, just making all that seamless. So yeah, and that could cost you a little bit more money because of the time involved with the people that are making those, helping you make those decisions and that sort of thing. I report directly to the athletic director, believe it or not. That's how it's set up at Jackson Academy. He's the guy that signs my purchase orders. Now, the really funny thing about this is he has no background in band whatsoever. It was set up that way so that the director that preceded me, it was the closest office for him to get to. So it was closer to get to Bobby West, who's the athletic director. So you can imagine the conversations we've had over the years when I go in and say, okay, I need this much money for a drill writer. Well, I can tell you the conversations we had for the first 3 years were pretty ridiculous. You know, he really questioned every aspect of what we did. But over the years, just through carefully explaining and them seeing the results and understanding where this money's going and how we're able to, in a school this size, I mean, this is not a large school either, and with a band of this size, put something out there that's not just competitive, but this is a band that's entertaining on a Friday night level. And we appreciate that, and we're consciously striving for that. That's one of the aspects that we try to figure in the program when we're designing it. Is this going to work on Friday nights? Is this going to work with the home crowd? So, and I think that's gained us a respect for the monies that we put into the program.
I noticed that some of the bands at BOA have T-shirts with maybe 20 different performances on their back. How difficult is it to get everybody psyched up to go to 3 performances?
Well, see, our problem is being in Mississippi and a private school. Jackson Academy is a private school, is that we cannot participate in any public school events. It's like oil and water. We just can't participate. So we're limited to our private school events, which there's only one in the state. So we have only legitimately sanctioned one event in the state of Mississippi that we can go to. So that's what led us to Bands of America. Here's an event that we can go to that doesn't care if we're public or private, in-state or out-of-state. So that's initially what led us to the University of Southern Mississippi Regional, because they didn't care. It's fine. It was more or less, we considered it a local show. We had some success. Hey, we're hooked. We're going to do BOA from then on. So it's almost like it works against us. We would like to do more shows. We would love to have shows that we could get to and come back on a day, but they're just not available to us. I mean, the closest thing we could do are out-of-state Alabama, some Tennessee shows, there's some shows in Louisiana, but these are, by the time you figure in performance time and travel time, I mean, we're talking overnight stay, and we just can't do a lot of that. So we have to focus on 2 or 3. Literally, we have gone on the field in St. Louis, and you can testify to this, and that has been our first performance of the year. We will go on on the field at a major regional for Bands of America, and it will be absolutely the first time the kids have been in a competitive environment that season. And it's just the nature of the beast where we're at in Jackson.
That's incredible, and some of those are 7th graders.
Yeah, and a lot of them, that'll be their first experience competitively. It happens every year.
How do you keep the older students inspired after they've been in the band since the 7th grade?
Yeah, it's really hard. That's a that's a motivational thing. I think a lot of it is just as they grow in the program, their responsibilities are going to grow. I mean, we're always going to max out what a kid can do. on the field, in a performance venue. So if he's capable of playing more, then we're going to give him more solos, or he'll have more opportunities to shine in the program. So I think that's a big part of it right there. But it's a tough one because you go 7 years of a program like this. I mean, I've got kids that are my son, who we had to, through hook or crook, we had to put him in the show in the 6th grade. He was actually marching drill I think he was in the show that did the 3 regionals. Yeah. So this is a kid who's finishing his 6th grade year of school and has already marched 3 Bands for America regionals. Yeah, so that's a factor, and now he's going into the 9th grade, and he's been to nationals twice, so on the field at nationals, and he's just entering the 9th grade next year. He's a credible trumpet player, but yeah, that's a factor. I mean, he's already pretty much experienced everything the band world can offer, so we just have to present him in a different way.
What do you look for when you're trying to find a soloist?
The very best player, obviously. That's number one. Number two is I'm trying to introduce, especially in a limited side, but I'm trying to introduce as many colors as I can on the field. So we're talking woodwinds, that sort of thing. So the best players I can possibly put out there, because they're the icing on the cake. They're going to enhance what's happening. Okay, they're going to show virtuosity or something like that. Second, I'm looking for as many colors as I can introduce into the program. Woodwind oboe the year before last, we used my daughter on oboe extensively. It was a great color, and it really worked well. It sounded great in the dome, that solo oboe. Second thing I do, which we do a lot of and we haven't talked about yet, is inventory the talents of the girls, or the whole band for that matter. Just go through at the beginning of each season and just have all the kids tell you everything they can do. And some of it will be goofy. I can skateboard. Well, I don't think we can use that in the show. But you get any idea you can use. The example was 93 when we used a girl named Robin Etheridge on the handbells. Well, we had no idea Robin could do that. But through this little process of them turning in an inventory sheet of their talents, we saw the handbells thing and we went, hey, that would work really well in the ballad, and it was one of the highlights of the show.
Why is it not intimidating for the band students to learn more than one instrument?
Well, a lot of it's my philosophy. I just think if a child can play one instrument fairly well, it's going to be easy to pick up another instrument. It's just different fingerings or a different way to produce the tone on the instrument. And I don't think it's a bad thing. And initially when we did this, we had kids that didn't want to do it, or parents that were concerned about it, or other directors telling me that this is going to affect the way your concert band sounds. The primary instrument is going to suffer because you're having them play another instrument. I had a lot of directors tell me this. And the more we worked with it, I saw that wasn't happening. That was the first thing that was proved wrong, was it didn't affect the way the kids played on their primary instrument. It was just another outlet for them. I've got several students, well, you're talking about Jeffrey, the tuba player that we had for years. Jeffrey played just about every horn in the band hall. And he was first year All-State tuba. I mean, it never took away from his tuba playing. Actually, I think it made him a better all-around musician, but a wonderful sax player. I mean, Jeffrey was just an incredible talent. It's what we talk about all the time at Jackson Academy is balance of the instrumentation. And that's going to change in even our setting. I mean, it's just, we're so fluid and we have kids moving in and out so quickly that it changes. And it's the balance of whatever activity we're involved in at the time, be it concert band, jazz band, or marching band. It's the balance of that activity that's important. So we deal with each one of them individually. So we want to try to balance the jazz band. So we'll swap kids around to make that work, okay? The marching band, we need to balance that instrumentation on the field. So we're going to swap kids around to make that work. Same thing with concert band. Yeah. Now, concert band is generally what we call the primary instrument, and we try to stay. We have a concept of this is their, so that they don't get too far afield and forget what they actually do play or what their primary instrument is, the instrument that they study with and take lessons on. Although we have a lot of kids that take lessons on their secondary instrument too, but but even with the concert band, we have to do a lot of occasionally do some swapping around.
You were talking about taking lessons on the secondary instrument. I remember the 93 group where they all played clarinet.
Yeah.
That was one of the funniest performances.
Well, again, we were running into the BOA sheet, which says you got to have so many points for woodwind. And we had made this decision a couple of years earlier. We're just going to put, this is the best utilization of these kids. Let's put them all on brass. Yeah, that's how you're going to hear the band. Just get them on brass. Well, how are we going to find these woodwind scores? So in 93, we said, let's just put everybody on woodwind. At first it was a joke. And then we said, we can really do this. So I called a music store up north somewhere, and I said, have you got used clarinets? And they said, sure, we've got used clarinets. I said, well, how much? And they gave me a good price, and they said, how many you need? And I said, well, probably 30. So they sent me 30 used clarinets, and it happened at the end of the season, we sent them all back. They bought them back at a reduced price, but the whole endeavor didn't cost them. It didn't cost what someone would expect. But we just spent, initially during band camp, we took 2 weeks. This was 93. We took 2 hours every day during the first week of camp for everybody to learn to play clarinet. And it was no big thing. We scored it very carefully. The legitimate clarinet players had the high parts, obviously, and everybody else stayed within the, stayed under the break.
Bruce, if you had to start all over again, what kind of things would you do differently, and what kind of things would you do the same with a small band with only a few weeks to prepare at the beginning of school?
I think you got to be thoroughly prepared. And I think that was probably our mistake the first or second, third years. We would go into camp and not have everything laid out. We were just kind of winging it. And I think that's just wasting kids' time. I think you just need to hit the ground running at band camp and then use the season to polish and improve the level of performance. That would be number one. Number two, color guard. I think the guard's got to be trained, and it would be that's something almost immediately I would just look to get as many girls involved as I could and then begin training, as opposed to what we did for almost 4 years, was just kind of skirt the issue, that the girls really had no training. Now, we presented them in extremely, we won nationals in '93 with a group that really couldn't spin. And there were no weapons out there at all. It wasn't until '98, '99 that we really developed these skills. So I would say almost immediately. Other than that, I think the lesson thing, which we've done effectively, we did effectively originally. I think that the issue with teachers, private teachers that come in your band hall, I think it's people that need to understand band. We've run into this so many times with the symphony people. They don't have a band background themselves, and they don't have an appreciation for what you're doing, or that these kids going on the field in a marching setting and that sort of thing. They don't respect that, and I think it's important. Whenever I start a new teacher now, a new private teacher, I ask them up front, where'd you go to high school? Did you march in the high school band? That kind of thing. So they've got that kind of background, they understand what we're trying to do.